Welcome to Wednesday Night Live. I'm going to give everybody a few minutes or a couple minutes to hop on. Well, Instagram decides whether or not to let people know that we're doing the live tonight. Hey, Christina. I'm still trying to get used to this new layout of this live, which is so strange to me. Hi, Carol. Wait, is there a way? Oh, wait, you can still wave. Hold on. I see Mimi. Let's see. I see it says, I just sent the, yay! That
Hi.
worked great. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. I was just saying, like, I'm trying to get used to this new, like, layout that Instagram just, like, came out with on the lives. It, like, looks so weird to me. I'm like, where are all the comments? I can't see them.
Yeah. Can you see my whole face or can you just see my eyes?
No, I can see your whole face.
Okay. I can just see my eyes, which is fine.
I'm not sure what's gonna happen. This whole thing is just so strange. Oh, I see, like, it just came on that it's, like, announcing that we're actually going live. So I just give people a couple minutes to hop on. I have to see like what happens when I hit this arrow. So, oh, that is so odd. Like I just hit the little arrow so that I could see comments so that, I can like watch them like while we're talking. But it makes you like, it makes both of us like this big.
Oh, no.
Oh, wait, but the wave came back. Hey, Kaz and Jesse. The other day, being Monday, people were signing on and I was like, what the heck? Like, I can't wave to anybody anymore.
Oh,
But it looks like it's back. My gosh. It's so strange. I can't like apparently I don't deal with change well.
it's fine. Oh, goodness.
I'm like, what are they doing? Changing the layout. How am I supposed to navigate this? Oh my gosh. I figure like Jesse loves your glasses.
Oh, thank you so much. Me too. They're from Warby Parker.
Oh, nice. Nice, nice. I just discovered them recently. I'm like, oh, why didn't I wish I knew about them sooner?
Yes, I love them so much. It's so I feel like it's more affordable and they have a lot of good options. It's just great.
It looks so great. I feel like there was a point in time, I don't know if other people feel like this, but I feel like there was some point where things switched over and like somehow like lens crafters got the lion's share of all of the good frames and like you can't get them anywhere else. And I'm like, that's so not fair.
Yes, yes, I agree.
Like it's just not fair.
How are
So
you
I am
today?
glad. Oh, I'm good. I've had one of those days where it's been like what like back to back to back, and I've been like so looking forward to being able to jump on with you tonight. So I'm excited that it's finally here.
Me too. Yeah, it's been a busy day for me as well. So,
Has it?
yes.
These guys are great. That I keep going back and forth. How did we change stuff? Yes, Carol, exactly. I think you'll really love the folks that come out for our lives. We tend to have these really great conversations, and so I'm excited.
Ooh, that's a good question.
You see that?
Yes, to give my eyes a break. But it works. If you tuck your mask like right under here, then I find it doesn't fog up.
I have such a time with fogging.
Yeah. It's just like you just have to put it like a little bit under the bottom of your glasses. And then for me, at least, it doesn't fog up.
Jesse's saying you need the glasses with metal wire nose thing. What you talking about, Jess? And you can't even send me a picture to tell me what you mean. Oh gosh. There's a defogging. There's actually, if you, for people who do like outdoor things in the winter, they actually have this thing called cat crap. It's literally called cat crap. And you put it on your lenses and it's like an anti-fog.
Ooh, interesting.
It's sort of interesting. Oh, good. I was just like kind of watching, waiting for folks to jump on. I'm going to introduce you to everybody like formally, and then we can get started. I'm so excited to talk about stuff tonight.
Yeah, thanks for letting me be on. I'm so honored.
Oh my God. Thank you for coming on. We're the ones. We're honored. So excited. Oh, this makes sense. Jesse means the mask that has the metal wire thing so you can close it around your nose. I thought you meant like glasses. I'm like, what you talking about, girlfriend? So many of you already know Mimi, who is, if you're not following her, you really, really need to. Her content's phenomenal. She's at The Lovely Becoming. Amazing. So Mimi is currently pursuing her master's degree in clinical rehabilitation and mental health counseling in North Carolina. And she's the host of the podcast, The Lovely Becoming. She's passionate about disordered eating and obsessive compulsive disorder. And she has experience working in the residential and outpatient levels of care as a patient assistant for individuals with eating disorders. As a clinician in training, Mimi hopes to practice from a health at every size, trauma-informed lens. And outside of being a student, she loves to read, write, go to coffee shops. I love it already. And connect with new people. So welcome.
Thank you. Yeah.
And I wonder, like, if you could tell us a little bit of, if you're comfortable, could you tell us like a little bit about like how you kind of came into the field and how you got interested in this stuff? And we can, I know like we can talk about orthorexia as well, but it would be lovely for people to hear a little bit about your passion.
Yeah. So, like a lot of people, I learned about diets at a young age. And when I was, I think, 14, my parents and I did this 90-day challenge. And it was about like weight loss. And I was like so into it and so excited. But at the same time, I didn't realize like I was told to like replace foods and to cut out like different carbs and things like that. And so I developed orthorexia, but I didn't know what that was called for another 4 or 5 years. And then when I finally started seeing a therapist in undergrad, it was really awesome because she practiced from a Hayes perspective and was really passionate about intuitive eating. And so I was really lucky to have her point out the eating disorder to me. And yeah, so with therapy, I learned so much from her, and I wanted to do the same thing that she does. And so I'm really grateful for her.
Isn't it like it's such a life-changing journey when you go on your own healing path and you realize like, oh my gosh, I could actually help people get out of that really difficult spot that I was in.
Yes, absolutely.
Would some people know and some people don't. Like, would you mind talking a little bit about like what orthorexia is?
Yes. So orthorexia is an obsession with clean, rigid, healthy eating. And it's kind of this fixation on like health and wellness. And you have a sense of superiority sometimes when you are eating, quote, better than other people. And you just kind of associate a lot of the foods you eat with bringing you health and bringing you goodness as well.
Oh, amen. And Christina's asking, like, how did you find your way to recovery? Like, what did that look like?
Yeah, it took time. But so when I started therapy, I didn't know about eating disorders. My therapist actually pointed it out to me and told me a lot about it. And a lot of the things that I know now took a long time in therapy of nutritional rehabilitation, seeing a dietitian and a doctor, as well as a therapist, and working through just kind of some basic of like nourishing your body and what that looks like, and pushing back on ideas about diet culture and I think we kind of slowly introduced things like diet culture and fat phobia. We didn't really start with that,
Mm,
which I appreciate because I wasn't ready for it, I don't think.
yeah.
So we really just started off with like, you need to nourish your body. Your body's not bad. All foods fit, things like that. So
Did you find, because I find like so many people, lots of people, um, experience so much anxiety around the concept of all foods fit because, when you think about the messaging from wellness culture, and there's really some strong messaging around like eating clean is the only thing you should do for your body because you're putting like, I mean, it's been called so many different things like poison, addictive substances, like fill in the blank. If you're eating like processed foods, fun foods, things that, like, at the end of the day, right, they all break down into like glucose, fatty acids, amino acids, and nourish your body. It doesn't actually matter. But when you're in that spot, the anxiety is like so high.
yeah.
How do you like work with that to be able to be open to the concept of all foods fit?
Yeah, I think it takes time, like everything. But one thing that we did in my own therapy and healing journey is that we did exposure therapy. And I'm a big fan and proponent of that. Of instead of necessarily trying to understand, like, the complexities of how nutrition breaks down and trying to understand, like, what's more nutritious than another thing, really just leaning into the discomfort and trying to expose yourself to those foods that are scary so that your body and your mind know, like, this is safe and this is okay. And I think one thing to note too is that it might not feel good at first because your body might not be used to like the different types of foods, but over time when we reintroduce them, it can be really helpful.
I'm just noticing Tara's saying, like, I didn't realize how intense orthorexia was until I had to go inpatient. I was deep in the yoga world, and that's where the orthorexia really developed for me.
Yes. It's actually kind of funny. I was thinking about this the other day, but this account that I started, The Lovely Becoming, it was originally this fitness group from college, and I was really into like clean eating and wanted to share that kind of thing. And I mean, I could have, I guess, like changed the whole account and made a new one, but I just kind of reinvented it, and so it just makes me curious and kind of laugh. Thinking about what it used to be and how I used to be and how I am now.
It's the journey is like really cool, right? When you look back, just to be like, oh, wow, there's things are so different.
Yes.
Jessie says she used to write down on little note cards fear foods on one side and on the other side, like what food does for her that's good for her body, like carbs or energy. Did you have anything like that that helped you like navigate the exposure, like the ERP exposure and response stuff? Because it terrifies people to think about it.
It does.
Like terrifying.
Yeah. I mean, I think you have to think about, I think you have to have a really good relationship with your team. I think a lot of the work for me was, do I trust them or do I trust me? And I really had to trust my team. And I believe that they wanted good things for me. And I believe that, I mean, I think a common thing is like this belief that your team wants you to gain weight and that they want you to, quote, get fat. And I think believing that like they wanted what was best for me and that they knew that wherever my body felt, that was good. And just really walking with me and telling me, like, it's okay no matter where your body lands, it's okay to nourish yourself, and getting that affirmation and that encouragement throughout the way.
Do you remember how there's, it's so awesome because you're actually like hitting on so many things that people talk about and wonder about all the time. Um, and it's been a really hot topic around. It just came up. Carol just said it like, how did you get to trust your team? Because that is like, it's a stumbling block for
Yeah.
lots of folks who are like, I hear people are like, I think my dietitian's nuts. Like she wants me to do like what? Like I ain't doing that.
Yeah.
How, how do you
Yeah, I think so.
how did you get to that?
I mean, for me, part of it was with my therapist. We talked about a lot of things before, and I just loved her so much. And so it was really easy for me to trust her in that sense, although it was really hard still. I just remember our first food exposure was pizza, and the window was cracked a little bit, and I was very tempted to throw it out the window, but I was so worried about wasting the money. But anyways, with my dietitian, I had to really get to know her. And I think what helps me is asking them questions about themselves, and really just like getting to know them a little bit better, which was really
Mm,
helpful for me.
that's great. Do you remember like what kind of questions you asked people? I'm
Yeah.
thinking because Christina's saying like I trust my team or so I say, but I don't trust myself enough to listen to them, which is that's an interesting distinction.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm a big people pleaser um, at heart. I definitely am working on it and have been growing in that area. But one thing that I really like about that is that I did want to kind of please my team. And I think like that can be a really good quality in some ways of like, if it helps me recover and if it helps me heal, then like I will take those suggestions because I just want them to be happy. I mean, to a certain extent, because at some point your recovery has to be your own and your healing has to be your own. But to some extent, I think it can be helpful to kind of think about like having goals and achieving them and having rewards for them. Like, um, anyways, with questions I asked them, I asked them like what their Enneagram number was because that really helps me understand people better, and I love the Enneagram. Um, yeah, and then I would ask kind of like one thing that was hard for me was just like grappling with a higher level of care, and like it was really encouraging to me to hear like other people say like your eating disorder is valid no matter what level of care you do or do not go to, because it can be hard on both ends to cope with going to a higher level of care and to cope with the idea that you didn't feel sick enough to get to a higher level of care. So
That has been a big topic for people. Like some people feeling like I didn't go to a higher level of care and like somehow my eating disorder is not valid,
yeah,
right? Like a lot of times, like I'm curious, like what your feedback is for folks. Like I know that you gave the overview of like it is valid, but like when people say that to you, like I know sometimes for me, I'll say things like the thing that matters is how you feel going through your day. Like you're the only person living in your body going through your day, and if that doesn't feel good, and thoughts about food and the way that you're living with food feels, pardon my language, but shitty, that counts. Like that's important. And sometimes people can hear that and sometimes they don't. So I'm always curious what other people say. Like it helps me have ideas of
yeah.
how to help people in that spot.
Yeah, definitely. So, I really struggled because I never went to a higher level of care. And I share that because I think there are a lot of people in the same boat because of several reasons, not being able to access treatment. It's really expensive. And a lot of us don't receive the care that we need when we need it. And so something I've really been thinking about is, um, even if we didn't receive the care we needed when we were at our quote sickest, that doesn't mean we have to relive those experiences and get sicker again in order to heal.
Mm.
Because if we've already started healing, like that's so beautiful, and we don't have to go back to those places to be recognized. We can acknowledge that I didn't get the care that I needed when I needed it, and that's something to grieve. But I can start healing now.
That just literally gave me goosebumps. That is so important, and the access to care piece is so important because it's such a privilege, and so many people, like Kaz was just noting, like in her country, it's mostly BMI based, which is like such a crap measure to base whether or not you get care on.
Yeah,
Um,
awful, really awful.
but being able to call that out and recognize it, to say like, exactly what you said, because you didn't get care at that point in time, it's something to grieve, and you don't have to go and make yourself even sicker.
Yeah, yeah.
Which makes me think a lot about getting to that. How do I want to say this? Like getting to that place of like, how do we self-validate?
Mhm.
There's so many different things that come into play, and I know like another area for that isn't of interest to you is like OCD, and there's such a huge overlap, right, with like OCD and eating disorders. And how do you get to that place of self-validation of saying like this is important to change regardless of what other people think or say or whether they understand it or not, because I sometimes feel like other people invalidate the struggle, like, oh, just stop thinking that way, like, oh, thanks, I wish, why didn't I think of that? Like,
Yes. Oh my goodness. Yes. It's so important to like understand that we can ask for validation from other people, and that's so good, but we can also validate our own feelings and our own stories. And um, I love when people say, like, you're never going to feel sick enough, because I think that's really true. I've interviewed a couple people about going to a higher level of care, and I asked them, like, did you feel like you were sick enough because you were there? And they were like, no, like, I still compared myself. I still didn't feel sick enough. And I think that this comparison trap that we get into with eating disorders is so important to recognize and talk about.
Christina's asking, how do you validate your feelings or emotions for yourself?
Yeah. So what I do is that I use affirmations, and I write things down until I believe they're true. Or sometimes I might not even, I hate to say like I believe they're true, because sometimes I still don't believe they're true, but I write them down until my narrative kind of changes in my head of like, my immediate thoughts might still be the same, but then my conversation with them or my response might be a little different. So, for example, if I have the thought that like I am not, I was never sick enough, I didn't have an eating disorder, then I am able to respond and say, I was sick enough, I did have an eating disorder, I did survive and heal. Um, and that's a really beautiful thing to be able to talk back and be able to validate those feelings.
Did you ever, it's when you said like you wrote things down, it just kind of it reminded me like part of going through my own recovery. There was a, you could ask my husband because we were together at that point. It was even before we were married. I had like sticky notes all over our apartment of
Yes.
like reminders. Did you ever use anything like that while you were trying to just like change your thought process, change your behaviors, change?
Yeah, I did a lot of journaling, and I had these little gratitude note cards in my dorm, and so
Mm.
I sticky noted those up as well. So yeah,
Gratitude gratitude cards are awesome. Christina says she sees people making like Instagram pages for their recovery. Like, do you find that helpful?
yeah. I mean, I don't know because I never had one necessarily during the beginning of my recovery. I kind of did that towards the end, but I imagine like for it depends on the individual. Like if it's something that's helpful for you, then that's so awesome. And if you find yourself, comparing more, then maybe that's not an awesome thing. So,
Oh, I love this. There's a couple suggestions that people do. Taz says she has sticky notes all around her mirror. Highly support. And
yes.
Jessie said she kept a letter in her lunchbox for like a year saying why she should eat lunch, and she wrote a letter to herself.
Yes. I love that.
Oh, Brianna says, I feel bad for, whoops, it's moving too quickly. I feel bad for feeling proud of myself for being recovered because my mom doesn't acknowledge my eating disorder.
I can 100,000% relate to that without saying too much. Um, I know that my parents have a really hard time with acknowledging my own eating disorder, and that can feel really hard and heavy. Um, and it's also really hard because you wonder if what you experienced was real and
Mm.
valid. And so I think that's where the self validation piece comes in, being able to say, I know that I struggled. I know my story to be true, and I can trust my truth is important.
It goes back to like being really grounded in yourself, which is hard when you're like, when you're feeling insecure and you're a people pleaser and a recovering perfectionist,
Yeah.
right? Like, and it's really hard to get that space sometimes.
Yeah, for sure. It is.
Carol's asking, how can you embrace the fact that recovery is not linear? Like, I get that as a process, not an event, yada, yada. But couldn't it at least be linear, like unrelapsable?
Okay,
Oh, wouldn't
so
that be amazing?
I actually really don't like that phrase, recovery is linear, because I read something once where it was like, if you really think about linearness, it's not that it's a straight line up, it's that over the points it goes upwards. And so you're always, you can go like
Mm-hmm.
this and still be going upwards, and that's linear. Um, but that gets into the little things. But anyways, the basic thing is that once, even when you're lapsing or relapsing, you've still made progress, and that's still an upward trend. And so I really like that image in my head. I'm trying, I can send you like the post that I read about it or whatever after this, but it's been really helpful to me.
I love it actually, because it's in some ways it's similar to this idea that I had many years ago that I talked to a lot of people about. Like I think about recovery as like a spiral staircase, where you're like you're going around, but you're going up the whole
Yes.
time. And so sometimes like if you started here, you can be like 3 or 4 levels up, and in a way the view is the same, but you're above where you started. So like for people who say like, oh, I'm back to square one, it's like, well, you're not. You're over square one, and you can't not know or undo the work that you've done. You're still going to build on it from that space.
Yeah.
And it kind of reminds me a little bit about that when you're looking at like that sort of up and down pattern, but still the trajectory is forward.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I like that a lot. Elizabeth's saying, like, how do you find the courage to bring up issues with food to your doctor or therapist? I'm afraid of being dismissed.
Oh
Mm.
gosh, that's so hard. I think something that I do, especially with doctor's visits, is I bring like resources. Sometimes there are cards out there that are really helpful that talk about like haze, and it's really unfortunate that we have to advocate for our health in any way, and sometimes in our recovery and our sickness and in disordered eating and things. But I also think it's really important to at baseline find a provider who is haze aligned, who is weight inclusive, and so you're able to kind of from the baseline know that like they're going to be at least better than you know, like not that.
Yeah, that that's a great point. Somebody was saying, and of course I just lost it because the thing just scrolled. Like writing things down and bringing it can be really helpful.
hmm Or even prefacing,
Danny said it.
when I'm scared of saying something, I usually preface it and I say, like, I'm really scared to say something, like, and I just want to let you know that I want to say it. And so there's that, like, space for it. So that's something that I like to do.
That's awesome. Oops. I don't give myself enough credit and I get angry with myself, not sure why. When I get to a better place physically, I think emotionally I'm strained and vice versa.
Let me reread that because my brain needs to see things.
I actually have to reread it also. Um, oh, I see.
Okay.
Okay.
If I understand this correctly, it's saying, like, even when you get to like a better place physically, it's really hard mentally, um, and you're not giving yourself enough credit. So I think with that, you can be weight restored and in a good place with like your labs and everything, but still have that emotional distress that's so normal. Um, and with giving yourself credit for the work that you've done, I think yeah, like really writing things down even before you believe them really just helps with like retraining our thought processes and how we respond. And so it can be really great tool to kind of put reminders around and write things down. It's kind of like when I was a kid, when I was trying to memorize something, I would write it down over and over and again. And I think that kind of really helps in the same way of like writing it down um, and remembering it.
I to 100%. I think that's great advice. I'm reading like three things at the same time. My brain does this sometimes. I'm like, I can't process like reading, talking, listening sometimes. It's hard for me.
Yes.
Um, this is a lot of people see this, and this would be great. I wonder what your thoughts are. Like Kristen's saying, like sometimes I find it helpful to talk to close people in my life, but I'm struggling because whenever I say anything, my boyfriend gets super worried and tells me to get help,
Mm,
which is kind of in a way is dismissive.
yeah. I would address it head on, which I know is kind of hard because, like, setting boundaries and communication can be really hard. But I would say, like, whenever you tell me to get help and you get super worried, like, that's not helpful to me. Because I think sometimes people don't
Mm.
know unless we share with them. And early on in my recovery, before I was more comfortable, like, saying that kind of thing, I would write it down and give it to people. And so that could be an effective tool while you're learning how to use your voice. It's just to write it down.
She says it's more because he doesn't understand completely and is genuinely concerned, but like too much so.
Yeah, and that's so fair. Like, it is scary and hard, especially if you don't know like where the person is at. And so definitely having that conversation of like, this is a more helpful response for me, or these are some things
Mm.
you might say that feel better for me.
It's a good point. And comment, like I think people who haven't been through it feel like it's like a lot that's thrown at them. Oh, interesting. Casey's asking like if silence is a form of establishing a boundary. What do you think?
That's a great question.
Isn't it?
So I would say yes and no. So I think yes, it is. They always say like silence speaks volumes, and silence is a response. And so in some ways, yes, I would err on the side of communication and that it's important to learn how to like use your words, but I
Mm.
don't believe in always responding every time if it's not going to be helpful for you. And so I think there's some nuance to that conversation because people will say, like, you should always respond. I would never want someone to not respond to me. But I think the thing about saying, like, because I would never want anyone to do that to me, I will never do it to others, does not mean that it will never happen to you, even if you always respond to
Mm.
other people. And so I think there's that caveat of like magical thinking where people are like, if I do to others as they, like, if I do good things to other people, then they'll always do good things to me. And that's just not how that works.
Mm. Christina's asking, like, what if your words that you express to others are invalidated?
Um,
Advice on like dealing with that feeling of being invalidated, like somehow what you said is wrong.
Yeah, I think that's where self validation comes to play. But I also think bringing it up with a therapist has been really helpful for me, because they're always super helpful and validating and helping me see, like, is that true? Like, getting another perspective, because one person's perspective is not everything and they don't know your truth and everything about you.
That's awesome. I remember many years ago, somebody had said something that I found like really invalidating and upsetting, and I remember the therapist that I was working with at the time was like, Monica, like so and so is not a sage. Like they're not all knowing. They don't know anything. They're not an authority on like you and the entire world. It's you like you don't have to be crushed basically by those words. It was really hard for me to work with that at the time, but it is true. Like it is helpful to have somebody kind of be like, can we pull the camera back a little bit and broaden this view?
Yes, yes, absolutely. I agree. I think a lot of the things that I'm saying, even now and in general, are things that I think to myself, I probably would have had a really hard time hearing this, before. And so I think if that's you and you're hearing these things and you're like, that sounds good, but it's too hard for me right now, like, that makes
Hmm.
sense and that's okay. But I would say, like, I hope that you'll hold on to these tools for when you are ready to hear them and use them.
Here's I'm going to sort of reword this question a little bit. Danny Marie's saying that she's working up to telling her sister and she trusts her, but it's really scary and uncomfortable for her. Do you have thoughts about like a way to approach opening up to somebody for the first time?
Yeah. I mean, for me, I I did it with trusted people. I think, first of all, recognizing that we don't know what the response will be and being able to tolerate uncertainty and, use distress tolerance skills is really, really hard.
Mm.
But also really helpful to be like, I won't say it will definitely be bad and try and protect myself from the worst, but I also won't say it'll definitely be good and possibly be disappointed. I think it's holding that really uncertainty and saying, I really don't know what's going to happen, but I know at the end of this, I can validate myself. My therapist can validate me. I have the tools I need to cope with whatever comes up.
I love that. It is hard sometimes. I feel like we want those guarantees, right? Like if I'm going to be vulnerable and open myself up, can you guarantee me that this is going to go well? Because like I don't know that I want to feel that kind of pain and rejection.
Yes, absolutely. I would rather
Like
have certainty any day.
just let me know that this is going to go well. Christina's asking if crying was ever difficult for you. It's something that I avoid, and this morning emotions had been piling up for a while, and I completely cried my eyes out multiple times.
Yes. I am in some ways not a big crier, and in other ways very easily moved to tears, when something's very emotional. And so when I was growing up, I was usually the emotional kind of caretaker for other people, and I found it really hard to cry in front of friends, or people that weren't my parents or by myself. So something that I do is that I watch kind of a lot of sad shows, to induce kind of like crying sometimes,
Hmm.
because I think it's cathartic and important for me. And I think there's some nuance there as well. Like if your job is really heavy or if you have a lot of emotions going on most of the time, then maybe that's not a great idea to do. But for me, because most of my days are um, pretty balanced and like not heavy, for the most part, I think it's really important to me. I always watch Grey's Anatomy and it's so beautiful and it makes me cry every
Mm.
time. And so I watch shows like that, and I think it's okay if you have a hard time crying. Like sometimes people are like, oh, I cry all the time, like, and there's no shame in that. But I think it's okay to have various levels of like movedness to tears.
It's interesting. I'm watching like people having feelings about having feelings, right? Like I don't want to have feelings, and other people like I want to be able to cry, but I can't. Like the tears just won't come. That I'm sort of like, I think Kaz, you just called yourself an emotional rock. You're as emotional as a rock. That can be protective though, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Like, I think we have to challenge the idea that like crying is something like that is better than people who don't cry. Because I don't think that means you feel less. I think it just means that you don't cry. Like it doesn't have to be such a weighty thing that you don't cry. And I used to feel really bad when I didn't cry about like a movie or about an emotion. And I was like, is there something wrong with me? Do I not feel it as deeply as other people? But you do, and you can challenge that narrative and the idea that like you feel less than other people because of the way your body responds.
I think sometimes I've noticed too for people, like you can have like all the feelings are there. And if like for people who are trying to talk about it in therapy, like for some people, it's like really difficult to cry in front of somebody. It's really hard to be that vulnerable. And people get so preoccupied with like, you know, feeling, oh, it's almost like trying to force the tears to come somehow to like legitimize the feeling. But they become, I don't know, like so preoccupied with like, why isn't this working? And now there's somebody watching me, and they get almost like dissociated from it.
Yes, I have felt that so much. And it's so frustrating because you're like, I want to cry or I should be crying, but I'm not. And like, what does that mean about how I feel on the inside? But it doesn't have to be like a reflection of what you're feeling.
Did you ever have somebody that's like, you know, an experience that I've certainly been witnessed personally is like there's something that's really sad, and there's like the moment that somebody asks you to check in on it, and it's like, are you like, what are you noticing? Like, what's coming up for you right now? Like, what are you noticing in your body? In that moment, it's like somebody flips a switch and there's like nothing,
Yes, yes.
right? And you're like, I know I was supposed to cry right about then. And now I'm like, somehow I weirdly feel like somebody turned a stage light on and I'm like in a play or something. And it's like so dissociated somehow.
Yes, absolutely.
It,
Oh, goodness. Emotions
uh,
are so interesting.
they really, I don't, thinking about like just the, you know, sort of like baggage that comes with it. I just noticed Elizabeth saying, like, I grew up being called dramatic when I would cry. And like, I mean, talk about, you know, like you'd probably want to cut that any tear off as soon as it starts to well up in your eyes if you're going to get harassed about it and belittled.
Yeah. And I think that brings up a really good point about like, what were you taught about tears that maybe your body
Mm.
remembers and that you might not consciously be aware of, but maybe your narrative around tears has been like, it's not okay, or you weren't encouraged to be able to let it out. And so I think having a lot of compassion for that and holding space for that is so important.
Jesse just said, I cringe if my therapist asks me to talk about how a feeling feels in my body. It's hard for me still. And
Yes.
Kazi said she hit me right in the feelings, not that I had feelings. Troublemakers. Um, Whenever someone asks me how I'm doing when I'm not doing well, all the tears come out. That's good.
Yeah.
I mean, it probably doesn't feel good in the moment, right? But it's like
It's an
nice to,
expression.
yeah, it's nice to be able to move that out. Olivia says, I feel like I get caught up in the victim mindset as well as have a hard time shifting out of sadness and despair. So I just try to avoid all the time, then feel guilty for distracting myself.
Yeah.
That's that's a hard loop,
It
right? So it's like I'm not I, it's like feeling bad about feeling bad and then trying to distract yourself away from feeling bad and then you feel bad about that.
Yes. Now, don't quote me on this because it's an unformed thought that I haven't fully processed, but I don't know that I believe in a victim mentality that we intentionally play. I think that
Really.
we are the sum of our experiences and we are responding and coping in ways that lead us towards safety and connection. And
Mm.
I think that we are not ever playing a role of like victim to try and get attention. I think based on our attachments as children and based on how we've been treated and how we've engaged in relationships, that's going to shape how we are in the present.
I like that. a lot, actually. I remember, I think it was a professor in graduate school. It was actually he taught race, gender, and diversity in social work school. And I've never forgotten this. He gave a definition of a victim, and it was not what I expected.
Mm,
And his definition of a victim was one who engages in self-denigrating behavior.
mm,
So, like, kind of like being a victim of yourself kind of thing, which
yeah.
I thought was like really thought-provoking. And I'm not sure how I feel about it because I also feel like the people that are in that situation, they're doing it typically as a way of protecting themselves from further pain,
Hmm.
right? So it still is exactly, I think, is what you're saying about moving back towards connection and feeling better.
Hmm.
Ooh, lots of people talking about being invalidated about feelings growing up, like being told there's no reason to cry or you're too sensitive or whining, getting sent to your room until you were done being sad or angry. That's shitty.
Yeah.
Um, or I'll give you something to cry about. There's a lot of these. Um, and my thing just like
Mine isn't even coming up anymore, so I'm grateful you're reading them. Thank you.
I literally am struggling to adjust to change. Apparently I don't deal with Instagram change as well. I'm like, I figured out how to do this before. Now you guys went and changed it again. Um, Jesse is saying that you're so smart. So well
Oh,
said.
thank you.
Um, it's interesting. Like basically, I'm trying to summarize this, but lots of people are talking about like how they adapted to that. Like Carol saying, like she stopped hugging a friend every time she had a hard time holding back the tears. You
Hmm.
know, there's when you get these messages of like basically like your feelings aren't okay and they're invalidated, it makes you question your experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, like, when you're questioning what you went through and whether it was real and valid, that's a really hard spot to be in.
Christine is saying like now her only response when someone asks how I am is like I'm okay or I'm fine and nothing more than that. And
Yeah.
I wonder too, like it's interesting, Christina, because I remember earlier, right? Like you were the one that said feelings are really hard for you. Makes sense. How
Yeah.
do you have them if it's not ever safe to have them and people are telling you that there's no reason for your feelings?
Hmm.
Oof.
Yeah, that's really heavy. And I don't want to always offer advice for everything. I think just like holding space for that and saying that's really hard is important too.
Amen. What do you do when you're crying but there's no tears, like breathing, shaking, everything, but no tears?
I get really frustrated and I'm like, darn, why not tears? But I also just hold myself close and I say like kind things to myself. It's okay. Like, this is really a release and a grieving process that's coming out of my body. And I think that's
Mm.
important.
I love, I do. I love the way that you conceptualize this stuff in such a gentle, caring way. You know, it's like coming home to yourself and becoming your own best friend
Yes,
and like learning how to hold space for yourself.
absolutely.
Olivia said, when my therapist said, stop playing the victim because I feel so much shame, that said, I feel like she was trying to empower me. I stumble with that one. I don't know what your reaction to that is, Mimi, but
I just
I'm
personally,
having trouble with that.
yeah, I don't believe that that's empowering to people. I don't believe in a victim role. I think sometimes people try and conceptualize it in terms of like you're playing a victim and you can get out of it. But the way that it sounds to me is like you're doing this to yourself and like you want to have these feelings. And I think like I really believe that we are shaped by our lived experiences and by our interactions with other people. And I also believe that we can have corrective and healing experiences. Um,
Mm,
but I don't believe that there's like we're trying to or we're playing a victim. I think the word victim has a lot of weight to it. And it really kind of brings in a lot of shame and a lot of like, you need to fix what you're doing. So I'm not sure I agree with that.
I'm with you there. Did you feel like you needed to parent your inner child as an adult now? It's a great question, Casey.
Yes, I did. I think everyone can benefit from inner child work because all of our parents were human and all of our parents had their own stuff that they were dealing with at the
Mm.
time. And being a parent sounds really hard. Like, I can't pretend to know what that's like. But to have to exist and as a parent and also take care of yourself, there's going to be some things that are hurtful and come up because we're both human. So I think it's really important to explore and understand the narratives we've been taught and the stories that we have been told about ourselves, and to really reframe those and reshape those is important.
That's so true. Jamie's asking how long it took you to be kind to yourself, and did you like ever do that growing up, or were you taught that before? Sort of like the process of moving through your eating disorder to recovery.
Yeah, I think I learned to be kind to myself and to put myself first. Like when I was maybe 20 years old, and I'm 22 now. So very recently, I would say when I was a kid, I was always taught to put others before myself and that it was selfish if I chose me. But I love, there was an author, Glennon Doyle, and she talks about how it's it's like if the epitome of womanhood is like selflessness, then that's without yourself, and that's like an erasure of yourself, and that's not beautiful.
Mm.
um and I think also challenging the narrative of like selfishness, like what's so wrong with putting yourself into the story and putting yourself there, and also the idea that like when you put yourself first, you're putting other people first at the same time, because when you're caring for yourself, you're caring for others as well.
Oh, that's beautiful. Man, how did you get to be so wise and you're only 22? That's crazy. Like you get so much wisdom.
Lots
I
of
think it's
therapy.
as you say, it speaks a lot to like the depth of your journey, right? Like the being willing to be that vulnerable and go those places.
Mm.
Casey's asking like, what was your pivotal moment or like did you have one?
I wouldn't say I had a moment. I will say I was really lucky to have, like I said before, a therapist who, like was Hays informed and intuitive eating informed and was just incredible. And so I think that was such an instrumental part of my healing. And then when I started treatment for OCD, I also had an incredible therapist who was so instrumental in my healing. And so the people that I had in my life were so good.
There's thinking about like your process of just moving through and healing us. I always feel like it's not like we get to a destination, right? Like we're constantly always like evolving and transforming, and recovery is not really a destination as much as like literally a journey of unfolding, I guess.
Yeah.
How did you tease out the difference between like what's OCD versus like what's an eating disorder when
Yeah.
it comes to like food stuff or
Yeah.
body stuff?
So in the criteria for OCD, it says it can't be related to like food, in the sense that it's not an eating disorder. And so that's how they kind of separate it, I think. Um, and so, but I do think that orthorexia is really the great mesh between eating disorders and OCD, because it's like obsessions and compulsions. So the obsessions being with healthy, clean eating, and the compulsions being like rigid inflexibility around food. And so I think that's where they kind of come together. Um, a lot of people use primarily cognitive behavioral therapy and cognitive distortion work, I think, for eating disorders, whereas exposure response prevention is the primary treatment for OCD, as well as kind of less talk therapy for OCD, and more so for eating disorders. And so for me, I started working on my eating disorder before I knew about my OCD. And so they were a little bit separated. Um, but yeah.
I find it comes up a lot where, people are sort of like, how do I know? Like if I'm, like if I have a set of like things that I feel like I have to do in the process of eating, like is that OCD or is that like my eating disorder?
Yeah, I think those are generally, and I won't say like anything for individuals because that's not helpful. But I think sometimes
Fair.
um, they can be food rituals, and they can be um, more related to an eating disorder, whereas OCD kind of has different themes that are not food, because a food related kind of obsession sort of would be more considered an eating disorder.
Okay. This makes sense now to me. Kaz is asking, how do you find motivation to continue down the path of healing?
Yeah, sometimes
Good
it's
one.
really hard. And sometimes, like, I don't really want to think about it too much. But I think about how beautiful it has been in the past for me and how much I've grown and learned. And sometimes I kind of want to stop because I'm like, this is good. Like, this is a great place to be in. But there's so much that I have to explore, and it sometimes causes me distress. And so I think when things cause us distress, it's important to heal from them. Um, yeah.
Yeah, it's almost like there's parts of you showing like, here's something that hasn't been healed yet, and here's an opportunity to heal it.
Yeah.
I think I used to, I mean, I believe this and I say this and I'm wondering what your reaction to it is. Sometimes I feel like people, when they are talking about motivation, mean like, how are you always like, I'm going to exaggerate a little bit, but like, rah, rah, recovery. Like, I'm like so excited about recovery and I'm reading stuff about it and I'm doing everything that I'm supposed to do. And like, I sometimes feel like people who say things like, I don't have any motivation. And I've had people, that I've seen as individual clients say that to me. And I'm like, if you didn't have any motivation, you wouldn't be sitting in front of me right now. Like sometimes your motivation is just showing up.
Yeah. That's spot on. I think you're right.
I think it's hard to sometimes come to terms with that because people want it to be like this exciting process of always being like in that rah rah, yay, this is amazing. Like,
Yeah.
I can't wait for what I'm going to learn next. And sometimes it's like, this just sucks and I'm showing up.
Yeah. Just presence and being there. And like, yeah, exactly what you said. I couldn't say it better.
I think about other like ways of when I think about motivation of just like looking for evidence of it sometimes when people are like, I just don't, this is taking too long, this is too hard, I don't feel like I'm making any progress, and like, why should I keep going kind of thing. And those are places where I look for the evidence of motivation, where it is things like you show up to your appointments, you sometimes read a book, you sign on to lives like this. There's still like some semblance of curiosity in there somewhere,
Yeah.
and that sometimes you have to, there's time. I was just in a group that Brianna Campos came and spoke with, and one of the things that she was talking about was unlearning plus learning plus time is part of what shifts. We were specifically talking about body image in that situation, and it made me think a lot about time, like the aspect of time, right, in the recovery process, where sometimes it doesn't feel like there's anything major moving, but it is moving because there's got to be that like the practice that happens.
Absolutely. Yes. I love that. The shifting that's happening, even when it doesn't feel like it. And I think that's something that comes with like continuing to follow the meal plan and like continuing to show up to the meetings and appointments and all the things that really helps
Yeah.
over time. It doesn't just happen in a moment.
Yes. And potentially like not potentially, but like not beating yourself up when you slip or you have Bree calls them dipsy doodles. You go, I love it. Where like things just don't go well, but being able to look at it and kind of learn from it. It
Hmm.
doesn't have to be perfect, but you're still moving forward. If like you've used a behavior that you tried not to use, but you're able to be like, all right, like why did that happen? Like what made me vulnerable?
Yeah. And even thinking about like, I didn't want to use that behavior as a new kind of like step, I think, for a lot of people of like having that cognition of like, I wanted to not do that is like a huge thing.
Mm. You know what? I love that because I sometimes don't pause there, and that's such an important place to recognize.
Absolutely.
Oh, here's a great question. Um, Carol's saying, like, help me help a friend. How can I tell someone that they don't have to risk their recovery by doing triggering stuff to prove they're recovered?
That's a good question. Can you repeat it again for
Yeah,
me?
Carol, you might have to actually round that out a little bit for us. Help me help a friend. How can I tell someone that they don't have to risk their recovery by doing triggering stuff to prove that they're recovered? Oh, okay. Got it.
Can you explain it to me?
I think, and she'll have to tell me if I'm sort of like on the right track with this. You can I'm trying to think of a good example, but I'm thinking of specifically like potentially taking risks with food or having like triggering conversations to prove that you're solid
Oh,
when
yeah.
you don't really have to go there. You don't have to give your power to somebody on the other side of the table.
Yeah, you don't have to prove that you're recovered enough to other people, even though there's that temptation for sure. I think it kind of reminds me of like when people, like are afraid to like, for example, eat a salad because they're like, does that mean I'm not recovered? And are people going to think I'm restricting? Like, I don't know. And so I think you really have to move away from like the idea that other people define recovered for you and just really lean into the idea that like I get to decide what recovery looks like for me.
Yes. I think we get into that spot, at certain points in recovery really rapidly. And that was such a great example of like, if you really want a salad and you're with people and it's like, oh, I guess I can't have what I really want, which isn't being true to yourself
Hmm.
at all.
Yeah.
Because all the worry is like, and I literally remember being in that situation, like being out with friends, and like I just was really craving like a salad with some chicken and ranch dressing and their dinner rolls. And it was like, if I get that, everybody that's with me today knows. And so then it's like looking back at the menu for like what wouldn't be an eating disordered choice and like being freaking miserable about it.
Yeah. Yeah. I've had those moments before and it's like, it's mind numbing and just crazy making and it's wild.
Linda's got a good question. How do you know when you're in recovery?
Oh gosh. All the good questions. I would say like you're following your meal plan. I would say recovery looks like thinking a lot less about your body and food and body taking up less space in your brain.
Mm,
I won't say that recovery is not having the thoughts about engaging in behaviors, but being able to resist engaging in them is a good indicator of recovery. And like I would say, a solid recovery is really being able to is really like learning more about the roots of diet culture and how to combat like not necessarily why you developed an eating disorder, but like systems that play a role in the development of eating disorders is really helpful.
I love that. The Sometimes like we talk about diet culture, a lot, right? But then at
Yeah.
the same time, like we sometimes like we don't talk about it in enough depth.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Bree happened to say I literally wrote it down because I was like, oh my God, that's the perfect way of saying it. She's like, diet culture, which we know, right? It's a $72.2 billion industry. She's like, diet culture sells you a problem that can't be fixed. I was like, shit, I never thought about it like in those words.
Yeah. And then you keep trying to fix it forever.
Yeah. I think you're in recovery when you realize you have an issue with food and you're actively trying to find ways to get better. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
And there's been so many nuances, I guess, between terminology. Like I've heard people like what's in recovery versus recovered versus like whatever.
Yeah.
And it can be, all different things for different people. And I think that being able to define it for yourself is really important. What
Hmm.
do you want for you?
Absolutely.
Carol's the going back to that question about doing triggering things. Like after a long time of no behaviors, thoughts, and then I need to be able to do things that people who never got an eating disorder can do. Still
Mm.
not 100% sure what that would be though. But
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose the easy answer, right, or is, just kind of pointing it out to the person. If you see somebody like doing all sorts of triggering things, if they're triggering you or they're triggering him or her, to be able to just point that out. Like maybe, I notice when you're doing X, Y, or Z that, it brings up feelings in me that are not helpful and it doesn't look like it's helpful to you. So can we maybe like not have this happen when we're together?
Yes, definitely communication is so important, and just saying like this is what's helpful and this is what's not okay for me, and setting boundaries.
Oh God, boundaries are so important and also so difficult sometimes.
Yes.
Emma is saying like when you say yes, even when you want to say no, you disrespect yourself. I felt so free when I began to say no. It's really empowering.
Yes. Glennon also talks about self-abandonment, and I love
Oh,
that so much, because I think like we really do abandon ourselves when we don't say what we want to say, and we are a part of the communication in the community, which is important.
absolutely. This has been great. I'm noticing the time and I want to be respectful of your time. I just like it's been so, so great to get to spend an hour with you tonight.
Yeah, me too. I'm so grateful, and this was such a good conversation.
It's these guys are so they're it's just an amazing group, and they've got a good sense of humor too, which is
Yes,
nice. There's so many great things about them. But
absolutely.
I've been following, your account and the things that you say, and I really love your content. You talk about so many important things in a way that just really reaches people. It's you're so authentic and genuine.
Thank
And
you.
lots of people saying like, have her come back. Thank you so much. No, don't go. This is so helpful. I'm so grateful for tonight. Thank you. So like I would love to have you come back if you're ever game for it. These guys love you and so do I. So really,
Yes,
really grateful.
I would love to come back. So thank you for having me.
Yay. Let's plan it after the holidays. It'll be so fun.
Yes, yes.
There's so many more things to talk about. Like so many people are like, come back, come back, come back.
Aw.
That's awesome. People, you're amazing. Come back. Yep. You're gonna have to come back, Edie. They love you.
I'm so grateful. Oh,
I'm so grateful for you. I hope you have an amazing night. And everybody else too. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. This has been so fun.
yes, it was so nice to see you all. Thank you. Not see you, but you know.
I mean, I feel like it's you.
Yes.
It's so nice to see your screen name scrolling. Right.
Oh,
Well, have a great night, everybody, and we will see you soon.
yes. Bye.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.